Welcome everybody to our third in the series for this year's Armchair Traveler Series, Influencers of the Albemarle. Now we have a lot of exciting topics in store for you guys this year. It's a coup de grace and just a building up of all different themes that we have planned this year. And I want to thank our friends of the library for making this all possible. You know, without them, without this effort of putting this all together, nothing can be done. So we love our friends a lot, and if you would like to show your support for the friends, you can join as a friend or donate. It all helps us put on programs like these, as well as our summer reading program, as well as many other things that we have throughout the year that support the community. So today we are going to be taking a bit of a trip back into the past to visit the American Revolution. And today is also a bit of a book talk as well. So we have an author here. So she'll be talking about her books. They're all based on historical figures from America's past and people that you don't expect who helped change history, helped influence history and what made this country today. So I'm going to introduce Ms. Bonnie Henn, who will introduce our speaker for this evening. Come on up, Ms. Bonnie.
Thank you, Jared. It's my pleasure to introduce Libby McNamee. Libby is a lawyer, speaker, and award-winning author of Susanna's Bride, The Girl Who Won the Revolutionary War, and Dolly Madison and the War of 1812 and their companion study guides. She is also the co-editor of The Epic Story of 1776 and The Epic Story of America 1777 to 1779, an anthology that was written by summer campers. Currently, she is writing The Union Spy Mistress, the story of Elizabeth Van Lew. A native of Boston, Libby lives in Richmond, Virginia with her husband and her son, who's off to college. She is a graduate of Georgetown University Catholic University School of Law. She was also a major in the United States Army JAG Corps, serving in South Korea, Bosnia, Germany, and Washington State. Please join with me in welcoming Libby McNamee.
Thank you all so much for the warm welcome, and my special thanks to Bonnie and to Jared and Morgane and Derek for getting me here today in one piece. And this has been such a fascinating talk to put together, because the best talks are when I'm learning at the same time as you are, and then I get to spew all these fun facts at you. So when Bonnie and I were talking, she said, well, we definitely want to include Betsy's Ride, and then I started to look about, let's include other women from the American Revolution, and it started to grow and grow and grow, and then I narrowed it down to a number of women, and then as I was researching, I found others. So there's still many others out there, but these women are absolutely amazing. And as we know, or most of us know, that all the trouble began brewing, so to speak, with the Stamp Act in 1765. The Sons of Liberty formed right away, which was formerly a street gang, I read. So all of a sudden Sam Adams had something constructive to do with this time, apparently. But at the very same time, the Daughters of Liberty formed. And while the men were striking and having protests and more of the physical activities, the women were boycotting, and they were using the power of the purse. And it was really revolutionary, so to speak, what they were doing, because it was the first time that women had banded together. I mean, it's hard for us to even imagine that there were no women's groups that had any purpose other than to get together to sew or to spin or something like that. So the women all joined up together in forming this, the Daughters of Liberty, and they were tight. They were insistent of, we are not going to buy any British goods. We are not going to buy British tea, including, we won't even drink tea if someone offers it to us. That's tough. And it went on and on and on. And what was amazing too is that at this point in the colonies, we were all importing all our textiles, and we had sort of moved beyond the whole spinning thing. So these women took their old spinning wheels out of their attic that they really didn't know how to use and had to learn how to spin. And apparently spinning was the most tedious chore that everyone hated. So here's a little historical nugget for you is and back then women had no rights. Basically, once a woman was married, she went from being what's called a femme sole to a femme couverte, a covered woman. And basically everything she owned belonged to her husband, even the clothes on her back, everything. If a woman didn't marry, she was even worse off because she would get pawned off basically to, her brother, and she would, basically have to be a servant in his household. And what chore did she get? The spinning, because she was a spinster. That's how the word spinster came about. Isn't that wild? I know, I love that stuff. It just, yeah. So that's where the term spinster came from. And the spinning wheel, it became the symbol of the DAR, because that was where women really put their might. But when you think about they're flexing their muscles, but by doing this tedious chore that they all hated, it really kind of felt like they were too good to be doing it. And they were doing it and not wearing the lovely gowns that they imported from London and that fit them perfectly. So it's really a lot to really process the extent of what they were doing. And creating their own Liberty tea, which was lavender or basil or something, but there's no caffeine in lavender or basil, right? I mean, it's just not the same. But they were really the first Just Say No campaign of saying, that's where they got their power from. Well, what's amazing is that Stamp Act was enacted in 1765. By March of 1766, the British had to throw it out because people weren't buying their goods. The warehouses were overflowing with goods that they imported all the way here, and nobody would buy them. Even the women who had shops wouldn't sell British goods in their shops. So, and that's, women who are really, not married or, desperately in need of money to be running a shop. So, really amazing. So then the British thought, well, we'll get our taxes another way. Let's try these Townshend Acts, 1767 to 1768. And it was various other taxes. Those were abandoned within 3 years, except for the stamp tax. Or, I'm sorry, the tax on tea. That's the one that they kept. But these women were just amazing. They refused to have anything to do with anyone who was paying the stamp tax. There were a bunch of women in New York who put an ad in the paper and told their fiancés if they had a marriage license with the stamp on it, they would not marry them. It's amazing I take an ad to tell them that. So then, of course, this all leads to the Tea Party, and then the Intolerable Acts punishing Boston, punishing Massachusetts, shutting down their harbor, taking their governor away, instilling Gage as the royal governor there. So that was supposed to make an example for the other colonies. Well, what did the other colonies do? They start mailing them food. They start shipping things nonstop. And who do you think put those packages together?
Women.
The women. Yes, absolutely. And then we, finally had the shot heard around the world in April of 1775, where Lexington and Concord, where the war officially began. But it was also later on in 1777 that there was what's called the Coffee Party in Boston, where a bunch of women assaulted a man who was hoarding coffee. So they were serious. And we can't talk about women without talking about Edenton, right? Right here at the center where this all happened, where Penelope Barker resolved with all of these women to refuse to boycott the British goods. Let's see. Okay, I thought there was another slide in here. Okay. There was, maybe we'll come upon it. But there's a very, you may have seen it, it's a very kind of a strange sketch of the, yes, okay. Maybe we don't need to see that, it's very strange. Okay. But that's what's showing that these groups of women were spreading. They started in Boston, they spread rapidly throughout the colonies, and then supporting the women in Boston by sending them all food. And here's Martha Dandridge Custis Washington. So that's quite a mouthful. Now, Martha grew up as the child of a planter, you know, reasonably well off, not super wealthy. She ended up marrying a man who was 20 years older than her, who was very wealthy. They had 4 children, 2 of them died very young, and then he died, and she was only 26 years old when he died. And she became very wealthy. And she was resigned, she wanted to marry again, she was so young, but she wanted to marry for love, and she met the dashing George Washington. He's the French and Indian war hero, and you know, absolutely charming and elegant, and riddled with debt, but she's wealthy, so she's great, you know, he's wonderful. We're just gonna have this nice, sweet, peaceful life together. And she was 7 to 8, you know, all these books, it's like, one book will say 8 months, the other book will say she was 7 months older, but she would call him her old man as a joke, because she was actually older than he was. You know, the colonial term cougar, you know. So they get married in 1759. Well, King George isn't even crowned king until 1760. So there's not even a whisper of any of this. And as they, you know, progress in their marriage, you know, George becomes part of the House of Burgesses. Then he goes off to the Second Continental Congress as a delegate in Philadelphia. And you know what? He happens to wear his full uniform from the French and Indian War. I guess everything else was at the dry cleaner, you know, but he marched in there, you know, all regal and 6'2", you know, with all his, you know, insignia, his medals, and what do you know? They made him commander-in-chief of the Continental Army. And he said, you know, he texted her, honey, you know, I'm so sorry, I don't know. They just insisted. They just insisted that I become the commander-in-chief. So there she is on this path that she never saw in front of her when she married him. And she was a very humble, sweet lady, very kind. And so she went up to Boston to visit him, and she stopped in Philadelphia to break up the trip, and there were all these bells sounding and parades and all kinds of stuff, and she was thinking, what's going on? Who's here? It was her. It wasn't Taylor Swift, it was her. So she just couldn't believe that she was a celebrity. And that really was kind of a whole new thing for America. And people were calling her Lady Washington, and she really was really just completely overwhelmed and actually thought it was pretty hilarious. And I wanted to show you all this picture of them at their wedding, because we always think of her as an older lady, kind of like Barbara Bush. You know, Barbara Bush was once a young, beautiful woman, and Martha was once a young, beautiful woman. And here they are at their wedding. And here they are with their daughter Patsy. So she had Patsy and Jackie from her first marriage. And very sweet picture of 3 of them. And she took her duties very seriously, but when she got to Boston, they were being bombarded by the British. And every time like a cannon went off, she'd be like, yeah, did you hear that? And everyone else was so used to it, but she was terrified. But she did not let on. She wanted to be at home with her. She had 2 little kids she was leaving behind. She did not like being there, but she saw it as her duty to be positive for everyone else. So she did a lot of entertaining for the other officers and the younger wives. It was a role model to them, because she was, you know, she was old. She was 43. I mean, so, but compared to Lucy Knox and all these younger wives, she was a role model to them. So what she did was she made herself useful. She was knitting and sewing constantly. Apparently you could not catch her without something in her hands where she was knitting or sewing. She was sewing socks, she was sewing blankets, she was mending. She was visiting the ailing soldiers. She was also bringing the sick ones food and visiting with them, and very kind. And before you know it, Martha became a very popular name that a lot of men named their daughters Martha, which is such a high compliment. And there were several Navy ships that were named the Lady Washington after her, because everyone loved her. And she was a great role model of the other officers' wives who were kind of thinking, you know, we're still new at this whole game. She's Lady Washington. She's kind of like our queen, but not a queen. And it's like, oh my gosh, she had an apron on. Can you believe it? People were horrified at first. They came to visit her and she had an apron on and that she was actually working. So then they realized, I need to hop to it too. If this is what, you know, she's the, you know, the top dog, I need to start doing it too. So, and she came every winter, and she met her husband, Boston, Valley Forge, Philadelphia, and here, this is them in Morristown. And, you know, as I was researching, I knew she had done this, but I hadn't really thought that basically when they go to these encampments, I mean, they're in, you know, for up to 6 months, and she's got her 2 kids at home, and it's dangerous, and she didn't really want to be there. So just amazing what she did, and even after the war ended, you know, we all know that General Washington wanted to retire and just be at home. Well, so did she. She didn't want to be swept up into this whole thing again, but saw it as her duty. So really just an amazing woman. And the next woman I'd like to talk about is Abigail Adams. And I actually grew up very close to her, but you know how you never go to the places that are in your own neighborhood? So this summer I finally went to her birthplace, and it was absolutely amazing. So this is the house where she was born and where she and John got married. And this is the room. They got, on this window on the right is where they got married. But it's basically all the original furniture, all their original artifacts. And it's run just by the local historical society and of volunteers. And they have the regular, the big national park thing that, you know, I call it the Adams family house, you know, with John's side of the family, which is amazing too. But this is really neat. Just it's just a completely intact from when she was a child. And this is actually a rose bush here that they planted on their wedding day. It's still going, so amazing. Now Abigail, her father was a minister, so she was brought up with the whole philosophy of service over self. That was drilled into her from the very beginning. Her mother took being a minister's wife very seriously, of reaching out to everyone and taking care of everyone who was sick, and being a real leader in the community. And she was extremely smart and well-read, and she never really had any actual teaching, but basically would kind of, you know, sit in on her brothers. But they had all these books, and she would read all the books, and then she'd read more books, and she wrote letters all the time to all of her friends. And then when she met John Adams, they really didn't like each other. At first, they really did not like each other at all, both of them. And then he realized that he really had so much respect for her as an equal, with her intelligence and her feistiness. So later in December of '73, you know, once they were married and she was away, I love this quote from her. She said, he was down in Philadelphia and she's up in Massachusetts, and she said, "Alas, how many snowbanks divide thee and me?" Of just how much they loved each other, and would write these letters back and forth, "My dearest friend," back and forth. And in the course of their marriage, they wrote over 1,100 letters to each other. Because he was gone the equivalent of 11 years of their marriage, forming our country. Absolutely amazing. So she had 6 children, and 4 survived to adulthood. And she gave birth to one daughter in 1777, and John wasn't home, and he didn't even find out that the baby was stillborn until 2 weeks later. So, and meanwhile, she's got British soldiers marching past her house. You know, she and John Quincy was 7 years old when they went outside and they saw the smoke from Bunker Hill. And they call it her cairn, where there's like a little, you know, marker in the street. She inoculated her kids while he was gone, and they wrote back and forth about it. And the younger two, she kept trying to do the inoculation and they weren't getting sick. So then finally she was like, you know, really did it. And the youngest son almost died. He recovered, but just unbelievable. And she really was the breadwinner. This is what I learned at the Abigail, at her birthplace. That they were joking. They said her husband was off at his volunteer job, and somebody had to pay the bills, and somebody had to make the money. So how many of you know the musical 1776, where she says, "Send me pins, John"? You know, in the song, she's, you know, they have this duet back and forth. He's in Philadelphia, she's up in Braintree, and she says, "Send me pins, John," because Boston is locked down with the intolerable acts. Well, he does mail her pins, but she doesn't want the pins for herself. She sells them on the black market at a huge profit, and that's how she's funding the family. So she was very, very shrewd. And this, Morgane, I know you're going to love this one. This is hilarious. When Lafayette went back to France, she asked him to bring a bunch of trinkets back from France so that she could sell them on the black market. So when you think of Lafayette, one of the wealthiest men in Europe, and going over there and going to the French dollar store and stocking up the trinkets, I mean, just hilarious when you think, I better bring those back to Abigail or I'm going to hear it. And then she sold them on the black market at these, I've got these toys or trinkets from France, and that's how she made her money. And later on, this is unbelievable, she became a bond trader. And they were selling these bonds to finance the revolution, and you could buy them at 10% of the value, but then she was able to sell them at the full value. And John was writing a letter saying, just buy some land. And she said, no, and it was one of their few arguments. And she basically said, I know what I'm doing. But she couldn't buy, she had to buy the bonds through her uncle, because as a woman she wasn't allowed to buy them. But that's how they made all their money. So just absolutely amazing. Taking care of 4 kids, and she was very much like a minister's wife. She was always reaching out to people, taking care of people. The amount of energy that woman had with no caffeine is really amazing woman. And there was the joke that she ran the farm better than he did, and the farm was making more money. But it's nice to know that all these women have their limits, because we're all human. We all, we all kind of want to feel sorry for ourselves. And after the Battle of Saratoga, 1777, John was able to come back home, and she thought, okay, we're good. And he resumed his law practice, and he was traveling around, and all of a sudden they got a letter saying, guess what, we're sending you to France. And she said, how can you contrive to rob me of all my happiness? She has sacrificed her husband for years and years and years, and now he's being sent overseas. And at first she was going to go with him, but then they were afraid they were going to be captured at sea, and then their children wouldn't have any parents. So she sent her 10-year-old son off to be captured at sea with her husband. So I just can't imagine what that was like, of these sacrifices that she was making. And they were apart for 5 years, because he went to Paris, and then he was sent to the Netherlands. And then in 1784, Abigail went over and joined him and brought her daughter Nabby. And then they stayed there till, then he was in London from 1785 to 1788. So he was overseas for like 10 years. And so it's just absolutely amazing. This is another woman. Has anyone heard of Mercy Otis Warren? Right. I had heard of her, and I should, because she lived in Plymouth, Massachusetts, and I grew up in Plymouth County. And by the way, I was just in Plymouth, North Carolina. We won't talk about that. Let's see. So Mercy Otis Warren was always a writer and a poet. She used to write about nature. She just loved to write before all the everything heated up with Great Britain. And but once she got caught up in the revolution, she started to write plays. She wrote these satires of the British governor Hutchison, and she called him rapatio, which I think is kind of Italian for, I think it's Italian for, making sure there's no kids, I think for rapist, like a very derogatory term. So it was all allegory. Everyone knew who she was talking about, and then gave these wonderful terms for the Patriots in the play. But she did it anonymously, because back then women could not be published. They could not do these things. And she wrote 72, she wrote another 73, 75, 76, 79. She didn't take ownership of those plays until 1790. But everyone knew that she was writing these plays, but she would never admit it. So John Adams would write to her and say, we need another play. And she'd say, well, I don't know what you're talking about. And then she'd write another play. So he became her mentor. And she corresponded with General Washington. She was very good friends with Abigail. And basically all of the founding fathers, she was highly, highly respected. She was called the scribe of the American Revolution. And why haven't we heard of her? It really is just amazing. So at the end of after the revolution was over, John Adams encouraged her to write a history of the American Revolution. She wrote the first history of the American Revolution. So it was a 3-volume series, 1,300 pages. It was called The History of the Rise and Progress and Termination of the American Revolution. Well, by this point, these parties had started to emerge. The Federalist Party that was much more, for bigger government, banks, and standing army, a stronger national presence. And then there was Jefferson and Madison, who had founded the Democratic Republican Party that were, agrarian and decentralized, a viewpoint. So she agreed with Madison and Jefferson. So she really apparently slammed John Adams in this history. So he said afterwards, he said, history is not a province of the ladies. So that ended the friendship with Abigail and John forever. Yeah, just absolutely amazing. But really one of the most convincing patriots of the American Revolution. And maybe nobody's heard of her. It's incredible. Yeah, her book is even on, if you look on Amazon, her book is on there. You can order her book. And they broke it down into 3 volumes. Now it's 3 volumes. So of course Jefferson loved it because he was portrayed so, wonderfully. So he bought copies for all of his cabinet and just crazy. Some things never change, People are people. So here's another person, Esther de Bert-Reed. Has anybody heard of Esther de Bert-Reed? No. She's another amazing lady that we should all know about. She's actually British. She met her husband, Mr. Reed, when he was studying in London, and she moved over here, and she really fell in love with the cause for America. And her husband became very active. He was very close to General Washington and was an aide to him, and he became the governor of Pennsylvania. And very wealthy family. And after we lost Philadelphia, we got Philadelphia back, and all the wealthy people kind of came back into the city, and she lived there because her husband was the governor. And she noticed that people were just spending all this money on clothes and wigs and just all this frippery and kind of celebrations, and just it like sickened her that people were acting that way, because at the same time, the soldiers who were the common foot soldiers were very much looked down upon. If you, the diary of Thomas Plum Martin, if you read that, it's his diary of being a common foot soldier and how badly they were treated. And she really thought that was horrible. And so she wrote a pamphlet, and it was called The Sentiments of an American Woman, once again anonymously, and published it. And she called women to sacrifice, not just be empathetic or not just say that they're behind the cause. That the women needed to be useful and needed also to respect our soldiers. But she called on them to act like Joan of Arc and to act like Queen Esther in the Bible and Deborah, and published this and really activated the women of Philadelphia. So she started the very first Ladies Association, and those ended up springing up again during the Civil War in the North and the South. But she founded the very first Ladies Association, and they went door to door and asked all these women, they divided it into 10 segments, they were very organized, they went door to door and asked all these women to donate money to the Continental Army to support General Washington. So they raised $300,000. Just, yeah, unbelievable. And they were very kind. If they knew someone didn't have the means, they didn't even knock on their door. But they had over 1,600 people donating. So people wanted to donate. People who, oh, you skipped my house, but I have this, pence for you, and this is what I can donate. So she accumulated all this money, and she wrote to General Washington and told him that she had it. And she said, I'd like you to distribute it to all the soldiers. And he said, I don't think that's a good idea. I was afraid they were going to waste it and all that. He said, they need shirts. We need shirts. And why don't you make us shirts? So here's this woman, incredibly wealthy. And by the way, she was very sickly and she had 7 children. I don't care how many servants you have. 7 children is a lot. So she had all these women come to her house and they made 2,200 shirts over the span of 3 months. And unfortunately, she actually passed away. She was so sickly. She passed away at age 34 before the shirts were even distributed. Just amazing, amazing woman. And then it was Benjamin Franklin's daughter, Sarah, had been doing it with her, and she took over it after Esther passed away. But she's known for that. It's called the Sentiments of an American Woman. But really just kind of shamed women into kind of waking up and participating. So another lovely person. Okay. So we've all heard of Molly Pitcher, right? But will the real Molly Pitcher stand up? I always thought Molly Pitcher was I always thought of her as from the Battle of Monmouth, that there was a woman named Mary Ludwig Hayes. And, but then when I started researching it, there's another, some people say that Molly Pitcher was at Valley Forge. Some people say there was a woman named Margaret Corbin who was at Fort Washington in 1776, who was actually wounded in the battle, but her husband died and she took over and she was wounded and she was given a pension. But basically, I realized that it really was a term for all women who were the camp followers. And the camp follower term, I realize now, is so lacking because these women did anything but follow. General Washington didn't really want these women around, but he said, okay, if you're going to be here, you're taking care of everyone. You're not just taking care of your husband. You're doing laundry for everyone. You're a nurse for everyone. Everybody had chores. Everyone had to work. And these women were just amazing. Apparently, the men all had life, and before they got the women organized as laundresses, and they were just kind of like, gosh, and then the women started doing the laundry and got rid of the lice pretty quick. So you could really take your pick on Molly Pitcher, but Molly was a very common name back then, and it was that she would bring the pitcher of water out on the battlefield. I always thought she was bringing the pitcher of water out on the battlefield to give people a drink of water, but she was actually bringing, these women, these Molly Pitchers were bringing water out on the battlefield to cool down the cannons, because the cannons, after you fire them, are so hot, and in order to fire them again, someone has to put their hand in the center of it and light the match, put the munition, gunpowder, and light the match. So they needed to cool down the cannon as fast as they could. But a lot of these women too that were out on the field, they were sent out there as scavengers of there's 10 Brits over there who died. Go get whatever you can off their bodies before they get them. So they were out there. They were they weren't just delivering Perrier to people. That was, if only they were out there and on the battlefield, and a lot of them were wounded. So being a camp follower wasn't, it wasn't this cush thing. But there was one point for General Washington, he wanted to move the army. Kind of, he's like basically, as long as we don't lose, we're winning. We're so much weaker than the British Army, so he wanted to keep on the move. There was one time he wanted to move, and there were 8 women going into labor, and he had to wait until after that. He was not happy. So, but they were probably all named Martha, all the girls in that group. And then Deborah Sampson. Has anybody heard of Deborah Sampson? Okay, good. We got one, and she's someone I've heard of, and. But I never really knew much about her. So she, let's see, look at the card here. She was the oldest of 7 children up in Massachusetts, and her father was a seafaring captain, and he was lost at sea when she was young. So she was hired out as an indentured servant at age 10 until she was 18. And she taught herself how to read, completely self-educated, she was, a strapping young lady, and she was very patriotic, and she wanted to fight in the war. So she tried to enlist and dressed up as a man. She made herself pants. It was illegal for women to wear pants, so she made her own pants. And apparently she had some strange penmanship, and whoever what she was trying to do the enlistment with, they recognized her hand movement, like they knew her somehow. So that didn't work. So she ended up enlisting another time, and she was successful. And she came in as Robert Shurtleff. And then she was sent to the Hudson Valley, and she was a scout, and she participated in several raids. She was in for about 2 or 3 years, and she was wounded in the shoulder, and she did not want to be treated because she did not want to be discovered as a woman, so she just left the musket ball in her shoulder for the rest of her life. So then another time she was wounded, and she had this musket ball deep in her thigh, and she passed out, and then they took her in a wagon for 6 miles, and then she said, I need to go to the outhouse, and 3 tries, and she dug it out herself, because she did not want to get discharged. She did not want to find out that she was a woman. So, and some of these stories, there's part lore, and there's some that's substantiated. So some people, she claims that she was at Yorktown and at the Redoubts. I have no reason to doubt this woman, that she was there storing redoubts. And in 1783, she was in Philadelphia when the yellow fever epidemic swept through town, and she was unconscious, and they figured out that she was a woman. But she was given, discharged, but given a pension and all that. So she ended up getting married, and it's kind of hilarious that, well, after she died, her husband asked for her pension as the spouse of a soldier, and then apparently he died before it came through. But it was kind of funny. I don't know if she had fallen onto hard times, but in 1802, apparently she took like her whole show on the road, and she would like do all these performances and talk about, all her heroic deeds, and then, so there was some thought, there was some embellishment, so really interesting, even doing that, that was unheard of for a woman to be out there performing and, telling about all her exploits undercover as a man during the war. So, another amazing lady. Okay, so it's time for Paul and Revere to move over.
Yes.
Because we got 3 16-year-old girls to talk about. They were all 16. And one is the hometown hero, Betsy Dowd. And oh my gosh, I hadn't heard of Betsy Dowd until you mentioned it. And incredible, absolutely incredible. So it was December 1775. It was December, so very, very cold. She's in Corolla on the Outer Banks, and at this point, Lord Dunmore, the royal governor of Virginia, has been basically kicked out of Williamsburg, and he's entrenched himself in Norfolk, and he's burning supplies, burning all the livestock, and making raids on Tidewater. And her father has a neighbor come visit who had gone to the mainland, and he had heard that that there was an attack about to happen on Great Bridge. And apparently the bridge wasn't that great, but it was great in the fact, it wasn't that huge, but it was the fact that it was the one bridge that connected eastern North Carolina to Virginia and to the Outer Banks. So if the British got control of that, they already were in control of Norfolk, and if they got control of that, then they would have control of, the harbor, then they'd have control of the Outer Banks, and then the slippery slope of North Carolina and South Carolina. So she overheard them talking about it, and apparently the man had said, well, I'm going to go find this, Colonel Skinner tomorrow, and let him know. And she thought, I'm not waiting that long. So she snuck out of the house, left a note, and snuck out of her house on her horse was named Black Best, and it was apparently a black Mustang from the Spanish conquistadors. And who am I to refute that? So this amazing horse, and she set off. And they went all the way from Corolla, all the way up to Hertford, where this, let's see, it was, I'm trying to remember if he was a general, maybe it was Colonel Skinner or General Skinner, I can't remember. General Skinner. So she went, so it was like over 50 miles to go find him. So it's the middle of the night, it's raining, it's December, it's freezing. She's crossing rivers, she's going through the Great Dismal Swamp. I mean, it's called dismal for a reason, right? By herself, nobody knows where she is. So, and then they even had to cross, she and the horse had to cross the Currituck Sound. So they had to basically swim and wade a mile across there. So it took her all night. And then she finally got to General Skinner's home and warned him, and he rallied up all these men, and 100 men who went, and apparently, great, once again, there's conflicting accounts, but the majority seem to say the battle had already taken place and the Americans had, prevailed. There was one American life lost, and there were over 100 of the British lost. But then when all these men came up, the men that General Skinner had rounded up, thanks to Betsy, then the British were like, oh man, we're totally outnumbered, we're getting out of here. And they got onto their, Lord Dunmore and the whole gang got on their ships and went out to sea. And Lord Dunmore was gone from Virginia for good within a month. So if that had been successful, things could have gone very, very differently. So it's absolutely amazing that this girl did this all night long, 16 years old. And then apparently she slept for a few hours, but she wanted to get home because she didn't want her parents to worry. So. Amazing, amazing, yes. So let's see, okay, so this is Betsy, and unfortunately there aren't a lot of great visuals, but it's blurry. And then I found there's a cute little picture book about her called The Ride, The Legend of Betsy Doughty. And what's unfortunate is that there's no primary source of this. It's a story that's handed down, but when you look at the context, it all makes sense, it all fits. So, and because back then, there was no record kept of women, or especially a 16-year-old girl and what she was doing. So this is the marker that was put up, the Pomeroy Foundation put that up in 2022. Betsy's Ride, teenager Betsy Doughty rode her horse Bess across Croatian Sound and many miles to Hartford to warn of British attack in 1775. And I had read that there's going to be, they're working on a mural in Hartford to her as well, as that. And that's, let's see, that's in Barco on Highway 158.
Oh,
that's where yeah.
They're going to do a reenactment of her ride.
Oh, neat!
On the foot, 70 foot from Corolla on the way to Hartford.
Wow.
As their part of the 1776.
Wow. Well, apparently part of what she was worried about is because her father he was called a wrecker, because that area on the water was called the graveyard of the Atlantic.
Right.
There were so many shipwrecks that was his job, and he would go find these ships, and he would try to help people, but he basically would so he had like over 100 horses. So he was afraid the British were going to kill all the horses or take them. So it was also, very important to her to try to protect her family as well. So amazing, amazing girl. And Sybil Ludington. Has anybody heard of Sybil Ludington? It was April of 1777, and she lived in upstate New York, close to the Connecticut line. She lived in Putnam County, and her father was a colonel in the militia, had 400 men under him. And they got word that there was a raid going on in Danbury, Connecticut. And so her father was trying to muster all these men. So what she did, she rode 40 miles, and she basically just rode to all these different soldiers' houses and kind of would go outside and kind of slap her horse and have the horse neigh, like to wake them up. And then she would go on to, call to arms and summoned everyone. So by the time, when they got there, the battle was over. But once again, the reinforcements were really effective of chasing the British all the way back onto the Sound and chasing them out of Connecticut. So this is a statue of her in Mount Carmel, New York. And what's neat about her is she was unknown until, I think it was 1961, it was the DAR who recognized her, and they put up that statue and kind of put her on the map. So.
And she's riding side saddle.
Exactly, exactly.
Oh, good
You've got to be dainty while you're a hero, right? Yeah, and what's amazing about Paul Revere is he was on a road, it was 16 miles, he was with someone else, and he got caught. Nobody likes to say that, and but he got caught, and so he wasn't, I don't blame him, I'm sure he did much better than I could, but it was really Henry Wadsworth Longfellow wrote the poem, The Midnight Ride of Paul Revere, in 1861 on the eve of the Civil War as a rallying cry for people in Massachusetts to kind of rally around keeping the Union together and all that. So This is amazing, is that he was with William Dawes, and William Dawes was not caught, but Paul Revere was. But Paul Revere rhymes with year, and Dawes does not rhyme with year. So that's why Paul Revere is in the poem, because it rhymes with year. So it's amazing when you really start digging into these things. It's I always call it, it's these historical nuggets. But like the more you dig, the more interesting it gets. Of finding these little footnotes. And so here's this girl is near and dear to my heart. Another 16-year-old, and this is what I envision her looking like. And I ended up writing a book about her, and I ended up hearing the story from a descendant of hers, and then I started to research it, and I realized, okay, I was able to piece it together and corroborate it. So her story took place in late May 1781, and she lived in an area called City Point, which is now part of Hopewell, Virginia, near Petersburg, and her brothers had been off fighting in the war. Her father had passed away, and Arnold had already raided, been through it, and he had raided, he had already turned sides, and he had already raided the area. And this is her home. This is it was occupied again during the Civil War. So this is the Union Army during the siege of Petersburg on her lawn. So pretty amazing. But that's what the house looked like. So so there she is, late May 1781, and they think that Arnold's gone, and all of a sudden this enemy army is marching down her driveway, and they're thinking, is Arnold back again? Like, why would he come back? He already torched everything. Well, it turned out it was even worse. It was Cornwallis, because Cornwallis had been down in North Carolina, and he, after the Battle of Guilford Courthouse, that was kind of one of those Pyrrhic wins where they technically won, but 3/4 of his army was decimated. So he was frustrated with General Clinton in New York, because General Clinton was #1 and he was #2, and he thought he should be #1. And he was very impatient with Clinton. He thought Clinton was not moving quickly enough. So he got word of where Lafayette was, and he decided just to act. He just took his soldiers, the ones who were able, and he marched them in late May, so hot and muggy, from North Carolina all the way up to Petersburg, Virginia. And then here's the nicest house in town is Susanna Bowling, so that's where he's going to stay. So he shows up with the entire British Southern Army. And of course, with the quartering, Suzanne and her mother are providing dinner for the family, or for the senior officers. And they start drinking and they start talking, and they're thinking, oh, these are just silly, stupid women. What are they going to do? And he talks about his plan. The next morning, they were going to get up at sunrise, and they were going to capture Lafayette. Who's the best? C'est moi. So Lafayette and George Washington were the two most popular people in America at that point in time. And in some ways, Lafayette was even more important, because so late in the Revolutionary War, the only thing that was keeping us going was the money and the ships and the uniforms and the support from the French. It was really, really, it was all because of Lafayette convincing Louis XVI against his better judgment to get involved. So when Susanna hears that Lafayette's at the halfway house, which is on the other side of the river, she basically waits until the last campfire is out, and she goes out. There's a secret underground tunnel that was built, and that during the 1760s, when they built these big plantation homes, they built a secret underground tunnel to get away. If there was a Native American attack, there was a way to get out to the river. But it also was very handy because they basically used the river as their superhighway. So it was, a place to store goods and a place to bring things out to the river and bring back. So she goes out through the secret tunnel after the last campfire is out, and she gets into her canoes across the Appomattox River alone in the dark, grabs a neighbor's horse on the other side of the river, and she rides 10 miles in the dark, which now seems like lame. Only 10 miles, Susanna? But she rode 10 miles in the dark and finds Lafayette. But as I started researching it, I realized, well, she had to find Lafayette in the pitch dark, alone, by herself, but she also had to make her way back, because that was the one road that connected basically the north and the south. It was the one road that connected Richmond and Petersburg was that one. It was an old Indian trail. So the next, she couldn't be found, the next morning on the trail. Sorry, had to run out to Target and pick up a few things, So she had to be back, and also just for Cornwallis to be like, where's your daughter? Why isn't she here? So I realized that, so she had to get there, find Lafayette, convince Lafayette that what she was saying was true, and then she had to get back before the sun came up, and before anybody, since they were getting up at sunrise to leave. So really an arduous task. So this is the view from her house. And this is the halfway house, which is still in operation today. It's in Chester, Virginia. Lovely place. And there actually is going to be a marker put up for her on October 27th at 2 p.m. by the Richmond Sons of the American Revolution in front. And there's a marker already in front for General Butler, who stayed at the halfway house during the siege of Petersburg. So Susanna's marker will be right next to General Butler. So it's still in operation today. Great, wonderful place. So when Susanna got there and warned him, that's when he left. Obviously, Lafayette left, and then when Cornwallis got there, that's when he sent Charlton, Colonel Charlton, and his Green Dragoons. He sent them to Charlottesville to try to capture Governor Thomas Jefferson at Monticello and the General Assembly members who were off in Charlottesville. They had fled there. So that was when, if you've heard of the ride of Jack Jewett. Has anyone heard of Jack Jewett? That's another popular in Virginia. But Jack Jewett ended up finding out about their plan, and he made another midnight ride to warn Jefferson that they were coming. And so we're not going to talk about him because he's a bore, right? But Jack Jewett is another great American hero. So here we are. This is just a couple of pictures we've made with various Lafayette interpreters over the years. So it's been a lot of fun learning more about Lafayette and also realizing just what he did to the American Revolution was really like a warm-up of what he did when he went back to France with the French Revolution. 2 French revolutions that he was like an integral part of. So really an absolutely amazing man. And I'm sure most of you are probably aware this is the 200th anniversary of when he came back to visit in 1824. So there's all sorts of festivities going on for the next 13 months. So I had I drafted a resolution and put it through. I worked with the state senator in Hopewell, and he put it through the Virginia General Assembly, making Susanna's birthday Susanna Bowling Day. So December 5th is Susanna Bowling Day in Virginia. So that's a fun tradition. And this was the very first Susanna Bowling Day. There was a girl who did a project on Susanna Bowling for her Girl Scout Gold Award. And so I went with her to celebrate the first Susanna Bowling Day. And a couple of her friends from the band were happy to play hooky, and they played Yankee Doodle and walked in, and she had all these assemblies and all that. So that was a really fun day. This is what the plaque will have on it, or the marker for Susanna when it's unveiled in October. Susanna Bowling was 16 when British General Cornwallis quartered in her City Point, Hopewell home, Virginia home. She overheard her plotting to capture Continental Army General Lafayette, who headquartered here at the halfway house. Susanna snuck out of her home, crossed the Appomattox River, and rode almost 15 miles through the night to warn Lafayette, who escaped. Susanna's heroism allowed Lafayette to continue leading the Virginia campaign, which ended with Cornwallis in Yorktown and set the stage for the decisive American victory. And that's what's neat, is by her action of saving Lafayette, that's when Lafayette started playing cat and mouse with Cornwallis and just wearing him out. And Cornwallis, one of my favorite quotes from Cornwallis is like, "I'd rather go to hell than go back to the Carolinas." He just hated all the humidity, and he, especially wearing a red wool uniform. And Lafayette said, "We're not strong enough to get beat." So he had interacted with the Oneida Indians when he was at Valley Forge, and nobody else would give them the time of day, and he was like, hey, show me your tricks. And they had showed him, how they, would work in the forest and kind of just leap out. And so he did the same thing, because he said, I can't face them directly. They're going to just annihilate us. So they would hide in the woods, and then the British would come marching along, and in their bright red uniforms, sweating, and they waiting for someone to bring them a Perrier, and nobody is, and they're marching along 2 by 2, and it goes for like a mile. So Lafayette and his soldiers, they just pop out and they pick just a couple of them off, and it was just enough to just unnerve everyone of like, are they coming for me next, and are they coming back? But they would just pick off a couple of them, run away, and just totally wore them out. And that's, by the time they got to Yorktown, Cornwallis was like, I've had enough of this stuff. The big battles in York, let's not even bother with the fortifications. We just need to rest. And they were out of food, they were out of everything. And the rest, as they say, is history. So all right, so here we are. So there's Susanna's Midnight Guard, and my second book is Dolly Madison and the War of 1812. So it's another rollicking tale. I thought when I started onto that book, I thought, oh, I love Dolly Madison, but War of 1812 is going to be a snoozer, and it's actually really exciting, which I never thought I'd say those words together. The War of 1812 is exciting, and it really is. It really is. So, but I'll save that for another time. Does anybody have any questions? I know it's a lot of information. Yes.
In the beginning, when you were talking about how the women refused to buy anything from Britain,
Yeah.
how were the husbands about that? Because how did they feel about
They
it?
went along with it, but a lot of it was that the women did all the purchasing. Like that was, their division of labor. The women did all the shopping and they did all the purchasing, and they actually were the ones that drank most of the tea too. So it was kind of interesting. There's a book. It's called. What's it? It's by a woman named Carol Birkin, and it was like, I think it was Women of the American Revolution, but she was saying that like men were in some ways kind of the grunt workers. They were out farming, and the women were more of the craft of creating these textiles and creating like meals. And like when we think of a housewife now, we think of, arranging flowers and going to TJ Maxx and, little, tchotchkes. And no, these women were like slaughtering pigs and milking the cows, and they were making the cider. And like the men were farming, and, that was arduous too. And that's what they were, and then the women were doing everything else. So it's that was kind of, I didn't realize that the women had so much physical labor of their own. So then when they start refusing to buy these textiles, then they've got to shear the sheep. They've got to take the wool and tease it out, put it on the spinning wheel, and then you've just got the thread. Then you need to put it on these huge looms, to make. Then you've got a piece of fabric, and then it's like, if you want a purple dress, you got to go find yourself some blueberries or blackberries, and it just, when you think about if every single thing that you make, that your entire family uses, is made out of homespun, and they were trying to make uniforms for the men and send them off, and they're trying to run these plantations that they aren't trained to run, and they're trying to make extra food for the army, and they're trying to raise their kids. Yeah. It's really remarkable, and to do it day in and day out for years without caffeine.
Prozac.
Yes, exactly, way before Prozac. I know, when I do school visits, I like to say, what do you think it would be like in your house if your mother didn't drink coffee for 5 years? And you're like, so these women were really, amazing. And I loved, when I saw the little nugget in a couple of different books, that there were plenty of times that the men were ready to give up, justifiably so. I mean, they're shooting people, being shot at, they're starving, they're freezing, they're hot, they've got lice, they're smallpox, they're lonely, they're homesick, you name it. But they were afraid to go home and face their wives. They were afraid to go home and tell their wives that they quit. So, and that's what I learned so much, and from this as well, of just like any war, you've really got to have the entire society buying into it to support, even if it's mostly the men who are fighting. It's like you need your whole society behind it. So if by some freak accident we defeat the British Empire, or they give up, then if you come back home and all these plantations have gone fallow, and you know, everything's falling apart, then everyone was going to starve. So it's really just amazing what these women did. It's the backbone of the American Revolution. So, anybody else have any questions? All right, well, thank you. I'll be around if you
Thank you so much for coming out tonight, and we loved hearing your presentation
Oh,
and
thank
about
you.
all these wonderful women who helped make a difference in founding our country and helping win the revolution. Thank you so much. Another round of applause.